was too tight. It was extremely dangerous. So you have that more flowing curve.
Yeah, there was nothing wrong with what was there before. It's just that the developer of that subdivision, they needed an access for whatever reason in that corner. And with the old road layouts, they would never have had sufficient visibility from there. So they needed to rebuild everything. And the developer has gone on record saying, no, the corner has a much larger radius, the road is a lot wider, and therefore everything is a lot safer. And that's not too uncommon to hear something like that. I mean, there would hardly be a layperson who told a structural engineer how to do their job. But everybody drives a car, and therefore they're all traffic engineers, aren't they? And so what qualifies the developer to make such a statement? I mean, what does he know?
Okay, well, we'll talk to the panel what they know about drifting. But just to flash here, Weta Digital have commissioned a QC to do an independent review after recent complaints about behaviour in the work environment. Bit of a news flash come through. But Gary, this is your part of the woods. Drifting, does this slow bend, low on the inside edge, high on the outside, lend itself to a bit of drifting fun, if you like?
Well, there's something, I mean, what Axel said, we probably need to have firstly the technical definition of a good or a bad corner. We're getting somewhere near that. But I have also heard reports that some younger persons have tended to use this corner for a bit of a speed track. So I think we need a little more researchers to find out whether the accidents are happening because some younger people are taking the chances that younger people do. But it shouldn't be too difficult to work out what the actual formula for that corner should be and have it remade appropriately if it's not just young people hooning around.
Lila?
Well, having absolutely no information or expertise about this particular corner, I am hesitant to express an opinion. But I do know that when you're doing development, you have to spend a bloody fortune on traffic engineering. And so somebody with that qualification must have signed off the corner.
Axel, can this be remade? Like level? Why don't you just level the road out? The same corner, but level the road.
Yeah, and that's how you would build a corner in an urban environment. I mean,
Right.
it doesn't really look urban yet, but it will be urban very soon. And so you would not have that built like a racetrack where the outside of the curve, is built up so that you can go around the corner faster. That's just not what you would do. That is a rural road design. And quite ironically, I mean, I go up Worsley's track mountain biking every weekend. And for the last few weeks, I've been commenting to my mountain biking buddy, what they are building there is entirely wrong. This is not how you build a corner.
You got to give it to the drifter. You got to give it to the drifters, though, Axel. They found the road.
Yeah, they'd always do.
They have.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm feeling a little bit sad for the city council because obviously when the developer gets something like this done, it doesn't necessarily get done by a traffic engineer. In fact, most of the time, it would be done by a surveyor.
All right, Axel, we've got to move on. Thank you very much for your time. All about drifting, we'll come back to it. Lila Hare, Gary McCormick, thank you very much for Thursday's show. I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow, 3:45.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, why was a student who was waiting on a COVID test result still at school? Security beefed up at a managed isolation hotel in Rotorua after another breakout. It's official, New Zealand is in recession after the biggest plunge in GDP growth on record. MedSafe warns consumers of a potentially toxic coffee brew that's making wild weight loss claims. It's the second dodgy product it's called out this week. So where is the snake oil coming from? The amount owed by STA Travel soars to $10 million. What's the chance it will get back to customers? Is the government growing nature jobs fast enough?
Rnz News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, ko Anna Thomas tēnei. An Auckland woman is upset it took 2 days to find out a pupil at her children's school tested positive for coronavirus. The child was only at Chapel Downs Primary School for half an hour on Monday morning and was confirmed positive that afternoon. But letters about the case were only sent out to staff and families on Wednesday. The school has been closed for cleaning until Monday at the earliest. The mother of two students, Ramona Al-Fouk, says the half hour that the child who tested positive was at school from was 8:30 until 9, and it was rush hour.
There's one main entrance and another entrance from the back. When you're walking down inside the school gate, everyone crowds together. There is not enough room, so kids are pretty much breathing on each other.
Auckland public health officials now say they want everyone who is at Chapel Downs Primary School on Monday morning to get a COVID test. Security has been bolstered at an isolation hotel in Rotorua from which someone escaped last night. It's thought the man got through a fence at the Sudima Hotel. A search started when the man was reported missing from his room at 11 o'clock and he was found nearby by Defence staff half an hour later. There have now been 8 incidents involving 12 people escaping managed isolation. The head of managed quarantine, Air Commodore Darren Webb, says that's disappointing.
They put the public at risk. Our job is to prevent community transmission of COVID, and any time somebody chooses to leave one of our facilities inside that 14-day period creates additional risk that's unacceptable.
Air Commodore Webb says they will continue to review whether additional measures are required. The Finance Minister says no political party could have avoided economic recession in the face of COVID-19. New Zealand has officially fallen into recession, with the GDP shrinking by 12.2% in the last quarter. That compares to Australia's economy, which contracted 7%. The National Party leader, Judith Collins, says these figures are proof of Labour's mismanagement and show the country needs a national-led government. But the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says no party can claim they would have avoided a recession.
This is a 1 in 100 year global economic shock. The number sits alongside similar numbers in Canada and the EU and so on. We have a particular profile in our economy where some of the exposed sectors like tourism are more affected, and we went harder and we went early. It's about the rebound, and we've already seen that.
Grant Robertson, the Finance Minister and Labour Party Deputy Leader. New Zealand First has pledged, if elected, it will lower tobacco excise so the average pack of cigarettes costs no more than $20. Its leader Winston Peters says the party supports the strategy of the anti-smoking group ASH of making alternatives to smoking affordable and widely available.
They say we want to be smoke-free by 2025, and meanwhile the excise tax is going up, and it's patently the policy is not working. And a whole lot of people, in the main poor people, who can't afford it, are paying outrageous excise tax for something that they could be persuaded to go from with the right policy.
However, the Labour Party won't be backing New Zealand First's proposal. Its leader Jacinda Ardern says tobacco taxes have been proven round the world to reduce smoking. Weta Digital has commissioned a QC to do an independent review after recent complaints about harassment and bullying. There have been media reports of up to 40 former and current staff speaking out about a toxic culture at the Wellington-based visual effects company. The police in Invercargill have brought charges relating to the production of cannabis oil following an explosion at a Kāinga Ora-owned home last Wednesday. 2 people were seriously injured in the blast at Rothsay Place, but have now been discharged from hospital. It's 5:04. There'll be no Test rugby for the world champion Black Ferns this year. The New Zealand women's side were due to play 8 tests, but New Zealand Rugby now says there will be a 3-match schedule in November with a possibles versus probables match in November, from which a Black Ferns squad will be picked. That side will then play 2 games against the New Zealand Barbarians. The Black Ferns' last test was a 37-8 win over Australia in August last year. And with New Zealand due to host the World Cup in September next year, New Zealand Rugby hopes to organise tests for the Black Ferns in April or May. The All Whites game against world football number 1 Belgium is reportedly no longer going ahead. Several New Zealand media outlets are reporting that coach Danny Hay couldn't pull a team together for the game against the World Cup semi-finalists in Brussels on October the 9th. But in a statement, New Zealand Football says nothing has been confirmed regarding the fixture. Amid COVID-19 restrictions across various countries, football governing body FIFA has relaxed rules for the September and October international windows, so clubs are not obliged to release players as they usually are. It's put in doubt the availability of some of the European-based All Whites and means Hay would have to pick an understrength team to play the top-ranked side in the world. And that's the news.
Up with the rising sun.
Here is a man who gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning, does 100 sit-ups and then reads all the newspapers, and by 6:30 he's starting meetings.
Coming up with new words.
Didn't downplay it. I actually, in many ways, I upplayed it in terms of action.
Up with the birds.
It does. And hold on, my alarm's going.
Oh, better turn that off.
It's that time of day though.
It is.
Get up with Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight. Tomorrow, Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and the Bay of Plenty. Cloudy today with a period of rain around midday tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine with some rain tomorrow. Waikato to Wellington, including the Central High Country, also Wairarapa. Cloud increasing with patchy drizzle. Rain developing tomorrow morning, then clearing and becoming fine by early afternoon. Severe northwest gales in Wellington and Wairarapa today. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, rain spreading north with thunderstorms possible and snow to about 500 metres in Fiordland, becoming fine tomorrow morning, but showers spreading north to Buller by the evening. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, rain spreading north and snow lowering to 300 metres, easing to showers in the south tonight, then becoming fine elsewhere tomorrow afternoon. Severe westerly gales in exposed places. And for the Chatham Islands, mainly fine with a period of rain tomorrow. Rnz National, it is 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Thanks, Anna. Kia ora, everybody. Tonight, millions of dollars is owed to travellers who booked holidays through the now-defunct STA Travel. So where is it? But first, a primary school student who was tested for COVID-19 on Sunday went to school on Monday and later received a positive result. Chapel Downs School in Flatbush in Auckland is now closed for deep cleaning. One mother is furious it took 2 days for parents to find out there was a positive case linked to the school. The child was only at school for half an hour on Monday morning and was confirmed positive that afternoon. Now other students are being encouraged to get tested.
A Chapel Downs primary school pupil was awaiting a COVID test result when they attended school between 8:30 and 9 on Monday morning. Ramona R. Fook, a pregnant mother of 2 children at the school, says that's rush hour through the gates.
There's one main entrance and another entrance from the back. When you're walking down inside the school gate, everyone crowds together. There is not enough room, so kids are pretty much breathing on each other.
She's furious it took 2 days to find out about the positive case.
They have absolutely no right to keep our kids or to allow our kids go to a place where they know that a COVID existed for 2 whole days. And now they've decided to close down the school for a thorough clean.
The child and their family are now in isolation with health authorities monitoring. The case has prompted a rush of testing at the nearby Otara Testing Centre. A nurse there, Alaviola Pormana, says far more families connected to the school attended yesterday and today.
Heaps of kids, probably 20 or more than that. I think they're feeling scared of how they heard about the school being positive.
The clinical director at the centre, Andrew Chan Mao, says they had a rush early this morning.
People are still apprehensive and concerned, but it is good that they're responding to the call to be tested.
Auckland Regional Public Health says anyone else that was at school on Monday morning is considered a casual contact. As a precaution, it says students and staff should be tested and stay away from people outside the family until a negative result comes back. Their family members can go about normal life. Anyone deemed a close contact will be contacted personally and asked to isolate for 14 days. The school will host a pop-up testing site tomorrow and Saturday. For Checkpoint, call Jordan Bond. Aho.
And the Auckland Regional Public Health Service has released a statement. It says in part, understandably, some parents may be upset that they did not hear until Wednesday. However, this information was shared as soon as events were confirmed on Wednesday. The Health Service decided to close the school while it investigated the movements of the child and the risk to others. It also needed to identify any close contacts who are at higher risk and need to be in self-isolation. Statement goes on to say the child who was briefly at school was not symptomatic, but was waiting for results from a COVID-19 test from the 13th of September. And doing the maths in my head, that was the Sunday. The child left school before children began classes for the day, further reducing the risk to the school community. The Auckland Regional Public Health Service has liaised with the family closely to communicate the importance of staying in self-isolation. The family has been cooperating with public health and members have been tested and have stayed in isolation until this event. That statement from the Auckland Regional Public Health Service. Security has been beefed up around a managed isolation facility in Rotorua after a man who had returned to New Zealand from Brisbane got out of the hotel. The man was reported missing from his room at 11 p.m. and Defence Force staff found him around 11:30. Officials say he didn't get far and believe the risk to the public is low. The person was taken to hospital for support and assessment. Our reporter Andrew McRae spoke to Air Commodore Darren Webb, who's the head of managed isolation and quarantine, and began by asking him how the breach happened.
What we're doing is taking a good long look into exactly what happened there, but let me just make the point that I'm really proud of the team in terms of what they do to maintain New Zealanders' safety and protection at all times. And this individual has clearly made a choice to push through a fence, intentionally and deliberately choose to do something they knew was against the law, and we'll ensure that the necessary follow-up actions are undertaken.
And has this person got mental health issues?
Oh, that's not for me to determine at this point in time. What we're doing now is just understanding exactly what happened and why, and then we'll conduct the necessary follow-up actions after that.
And where has this person been taken to?
They are currently in the Rotorua Hospital under observations with the New Zealand Police involved, and from there we'll just determine the best next course of action.
A number of people, or some of those who have absconded, have talked about mental health issues, and they're, under a lot of pressure. Can more be done to help them cope?
I would say the vast majority who come back to New Zealand have a really successful and positive experience. We've had over 50,000 people come through our facilities, and the number of situations that lead to an extreme event, such as somebody choosing to abscond, are very rare. We have great systems in place to support all the needs of individuals coming through. We have welfare, wraparound services, cultural support mechanisms, and health-specific requirements are met to a really, really high standard.
How many people have claimed to have mental health issues that have been in isolation?
I don't know the specific numbers of that question. We are seeing people coming home to New Zealand where they are carrying, challenging future scenarios for themselves. And as I say, we are doing all we can to take care of their needs and get them on their feet again as they enter back into New Zealand.
Can we look at the jet park incident with the nurse? What have you learned from that incident, and what can you tell us?
All the way along, we're always looking to fix and make things better, and I think this is another example of where continual improvement will continue to be the case. We're seeing that those individuals and all of the support staff in these facilities are well trained, they're well supported, all the necessary protocols were met in this instance. What we're seeing is COVID as a virus is unpredictable, it's tricky, as we've heard, and in this instance it may well prove to be the case that despite our best efforts, engagement with people who do have sickness and illness may result in this transmission.
Do we know how long the nurse was in the room with the person that was infected?
I'm not going to speculate on that situation. I'll just let the Auckland Regional Public Health Service do their job in investigating what happened.
And is it confirmed that the person actually did have COVID?
I've received the report that they had a positive test case.
Now, in terms of PPE gear, what amount of gear were they wearing at the time?
Yeah, so the nursing staff, as I say, are extremely well trained. This is their professional undertaking. They have face masks, they have hand gloves, they wear the full body shields. They're very well aware of the needs to maintain everything they can for themselves, their own whānau and family safety, and of course the safety of every other individual in the facility.
What's done in terms of auditing the wearing and the taking off and disposing of PEP gear?
Yeah, I mean, the training that goes with these sorts of services is one of the key elements to it. We've had many reviews go through. All of our facilities of varying natures, whether they are health-based or security-based, and we'll continue to do that in an ongoing way. The results of those reviews so far have been very good, and there's nothing for me to suggest that wouldn't be the case.
What information has come from CCTV and swipe card movements at the jet park?
There's nothing specific that I'd be able to describe that's of any further information at this stage to determine exactly what happened.
You don't really know what went wrong?
I think that's one of the situations with COVID all the way through. You can apply your best measures of defence, multi-layered, you can do training, you can have the right IPC measures, all of the protocols in place. You're in a facility which has people who are sick with the COVID virus, and it's just an unfortunate situation where, despite everything we do, sometimes these things are likely to happen.
In terms of the Rotorua incident last night, I guess you're pretty disappointed that someone managed to escape.
Yeah, I mean, like the rest of New Zealanders, we're very disappointed that somebody's chosen to do that, force their way through the fence. We've got great systems in place. Again, I'm very proud of our team on site who do a fantastic job in keeping New Zealand safe. As I say, we've only had 12 people escape out of 50,000 over the last 5.5, 6 months. It's a very, very low number. I would say our systems in place contributed to a really rapid we caught this person very quickly, within 30 minutes. The health risk assessment for the community is assessed as very low. It's highly unlikely that additional contact has been made. But as I say, we'll continue to follow that up and use all the tools that we have at our disposal to ensure that is the case.
And that was Air Commodore Darren Webb speaking to Andrew McRae. The amount owed to creditors of the failed travel group STA has soared to more than $10 million, with customers told there's little chance of getting their hard-earned cash back. Nearly a month on from the company's closure, administrators, Deloitte, are still trying to figure out where the money owed to Kiwi travellers has gone. Meanwhile, the former head of the company's New Zealand arm says he too is a victim of its downfall. Checkpoint reporter Nick Trubridge tried to trace the cash.
Right now, Bridie Chetwin-Kelly should be filling her mates in on a dream trip to the United States. But she never got to make that trip to America due to COVID-19 disruptions. Instead, what she did get was a credit for over $3,000 from STA Travel NZ. But with the company's nosedive into voluntary administration, that credit is now useless.
The credit made it kind of like okay, and then now we have nothing. I'm like, what did I just waste all this time working for these flights for? It's super upsetting. I'm gutted.
Bridie was told her credit was initially with her airline, Fiji Airways.
And then a few months down the track, I think it was the start of August, they sent us a letter saying that actually the credit was now with STA Travel.
But now, Deloitte administrators appointed to STA Travel say the company is currently unable to honour any credits or refunds for cancelled trips. So Checkpoint wanted to try and drill into where Chetwin-Kelly's money and the hard-earned cash of other affected Kiwis has gone. We started with STA Travel's now former New Zealand country manager, Sam Morra, only to discover he too is a victim of his former employer's rapid descent into voluntary administration.
Myself and all of our staff just have no affiliation at all with the company now, where unsecured credit is just like everyone else.
So you guys are actually waiting to be paid as well?
Yes.
As for the money meant to honour credits and refunds owed to former STA customers?
I just don't know. There's a financial assessment going on at the moment, and so that's what Deloitte is working through. And, unfortunately, you'd have to just seek comment from them, I'm afraid. Sorry, I wish I could help, but it's just I really don't know anything. I'm as much in the dark as anybody else.
So we went further up the chain to STA Travel NZ's parent company, STA Travel Holding AG, the failure of which preceded the insolvency of its New Zealand arm. Checkpoint reached out to its chief executive, Casper Urhammer, sending him a request for comment via social media.
As STA Travel NZ Limited was wholly owned by STA Travel Holding AG, of which you were chief executive, I'd like to interview you for our story.
But we received no response, let alone any answers, from the head of the Switzerland-based parent company. Meanwhile, back in New Zealand, out-of-pocket customers like Bridie Chetwin Kelly are left to draw their own conclusions about where their money has gone.
Well, just based on the meeting that Deloitte had, the money is nowhere. I mean, we assumed that the money we paid to STA went to Fiji Airways, but we don't actually know if our money was ever paid to them. And then when Fiji Airways apparently paid it back, it went straight overseas to the big head companies in Europe. So we have absolutely no idea where our money is.
Deloitte partner David Webb, along with his colleague Colin Owens, have been appointed joint administrators of STA Travel NZ. Webb and Owens are following the money. Part of their investigation is figuring out whether the funds, unlike Kiwi customers left out of pocket, have left New Zealand's shores.
Where is that cash being held? Is it being held in STA entities, and that may be not in New Zealand, or is it held by third parties who the administrators need to follow up and try and get that money under our control?
A key job for the administrators has been collecting data from creditors, STA's former employees in New Zealand, and the New Zealand company's directors. But it hasn't been an easy job.
The key data being the booking data, the finance and the treasury data was held by STA employees overseas who are either a limited number of them are still around or have found themselves being retrenched through their own country's administrations.
Webb and Owens are due to issue a report on Monday with their initial findings into the likelihood of refunds. And that's if the money is located. A meeting will then be scheduled before the end of September when creditors will vote on STA NZ's future. But Webb believes liquidation is highly likely. As for payouts for those creditors, Chetwin Kelly believes that's highly unlikely based on Deloitte's first meeting with creditors a matter of weeks ago.
A lot of things were clarified, like the fact that the chances are of us getting any money back is less than 1%. But no, they didn't really have a good understanding of where our money was. And they said that they were very transparent. They were like, we've just started the process. We don't actually know how to answer a lot of these questions yet. They don't really know, which is that's the thing that upsets me the most. Where's our money gone then,
And Chetwin Kelly certainly isn't alone in asking that question. In a statement released today, the administrators revealed the amount owed to STA Travel Group's creditors has skyrocketed from the previously publicised figure of $7 million to more than $10 million. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
It is 23 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that. If you were a customer of STA and looking for your money, do get in touch. Let us know your circumstances. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. New Zealand has officially fallen into its first recession in a decade, with the economy shrinking by the largest amount on record. Official numbers show GDP, the broad measure of growth, shrank by 12.2% in the 3 months ended June, battered by the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
For almost 30 years, Abstract Design has operated on Cuba Street in central Wellington, selling laser-cut art, furniture, even cut-out politicians. Sam Jones has seen a lot. They survived the last recession. Now they hope to survive this one.
Cuba Street's not been a very nice place to be at the moment.
The latest growth figures out today show a record drop of 12.2% in the last quarter. That makes 2 quarters in a row now of negative growth, the technical definition of a recession. The first in a decade.
Absolutely gutted. I really don't know what's going to happen, but we're just going to keep trying.
You'll get through?
I hope so.
The plunge in GDP is steep, but few are surprised. Economists expected a drop. In fact, Treasury thought it would be worse. It's the cost of a countrywide lockdown, 6 weeks at alert level 4, and a sealed border, the tourism tap turned off.
There is no way that any political party could claim that there would not have been a recession in New Zealand during this period of time. This is a 1 in 100 year global economic shock.
Grant Robertson and Jacinda Ardern stand by their handling of the pandemic and in turn the economy.
GDP is just one measure of the overall health and well-being of a country.
A success for me is saving people's lives, supporting and saving people's businesses, and coming out the other side faster and quicker and with more activity out the other side, and that is what we're seeing in New Zealand.
But National says the pain did not have to be so severe. It says Labour and its lockdown made the situation worse. In Australia, for example, the drop was just 7% for the same period.
There was a better way and the government failed to take it.
The big difference between New Zealand and Australia is the nature of the lockdown. There was no construction in New Zealand, much tougher rules in place, and we're paying the price for that.
I'm happy with that comparison to be made.
If you compare it unemployment, our peak is going to be significantly lower than Australia's. We're going to come out of this year with our debt a little lower than Australia's. Our growth and our rebound out of this will be faster and quicker.
Judith Collins is unconvinced. She says she's the one to lead the recovery.
I think they think the economy is just monopoly money and there's no consequences to massive borrowing with no plan ahead.
Every dollar the government borrows on stimulus gives us a game of two halves. There's the sugar hit and then the shutdown.
I back New Zealand's rebound.
It was meant to be the election this Saturday. These numbers would have been the last thing on voters' minds before heading into the ballot box. Now they have another month to weigh where the blame lies.
We're in a worldwide recession, but it's not our government's fault.
I don't think it's as bad as some countries. It's worldwide, isn't it? So the economy had to be in a bit of a bad way.
Things will get better.
Economists say GDP will bounce up in the next quarter. Those figures out in mid-December. Atu iti whare parimata, mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch.
About half a dozen sellers of a coffee powder marketed as a weight loss product have been told to close up shop or they could face prosecution after the brew was found to contain potentially dangerous levels of an amphetamine-like substance. And MedSafe is warning consumers to ditch any supplies of Elevacity Elevate Smart Coffee, version number 3, in the powder form. It is the second time this week that the watchdogs issued a serious warning about products masquerading as medicines, making unsubstantiated therapeutic claims with no proof and with the risk of significant side effects. But getting them off the market can be tough. First off, MedSafe Compliance Manager Derek Fitzgerald explains what's wrong with the coffee brew.
This coffee contains a Class C controlled drug. The particular controlled drug that's in there occurs in very small amounts in natural coffee, but these products have been fortified, if you like. And so a therapeutic claim is being made for them. So people shouldn't take them and they should return them to the supplier.
A couple of things there. What's the therapeutic claim that they're making?
Okay, so they're saying things like for weight loss or for weight management or to improve mood, that type of thing, fairly soft therapeutic claims, but they're definitely therapeutic claims, and it's clear that they're using those therapeutic claims to market the product over and above ordinary coffee.
And so this Class C drug, what is it? Is it an amphetamine, and what could it do?
Yes, it's like an amphetamine type of substance, and it has adverse reactions of possibly agitation and psychological effects and cardiovascular effects like increased heart rate and blood pressure, that type of thing.
So have you had or have there been adverse events reported as a consequence of this product?
We haven't had any reported at the present time. So there is definitely the possibility that someone has suffered from this, but we haven't had any reported at the present time, no.
How much of this stuff is circulating and how come it's available on the market?
We're not sure. It's been sold online, and so the interesting thing is that people in New Zealand are setting up websites and selling it, but they don't actually have the product. The product is being shipped directly to the customers from probably the US. So we've taken action with 6 different distributors in New Zealand, given them warnings, and told them that they're breaking the law and what the penalty could possibly be. And they've, as far as we are aware at the present time, are complying with that and have shut down that particular part of their business.
So potentially, though, could people be ordering this as individuals off online from other countries and just shipping it to themselves for use?
They could do. We don't recommend that at all because of the hazards involved. And people just have to remember that people selling these products online, they don't care about your health or things like that. They might pretend to care about your health or your well-being. They're just in it for making money. So there's no controls over these products as they come into the country. If they come in the post and it looks like a pot of coffee, it could go through. So we recommend that people do not buy this. And that applies to a whole load of therapeutic-like or therapeutic products that might be offered online and come in from overseas.
That's a bit of a problem, though, isn't it, Derek? Because, that's really hard to stop.
Yeah, we for those products that definitely do look like medicines, tablets and capsules and creams and ointments and that type of thing, we have an arrangement with customs, and they are present at the border, and they go through and they refer things that look like medicines to MedSafe. So we probably detect around about 1,000, 1,200 packages a year that are coming through that contain maybe prescription medicines, for instance, or controlled drugs, and they are stopped at the border, and the person they are consigned to has to have a good excuse, like, for instance, a prescription from their doctor before we'll release them. So that there is a mechanism there that will stop some products from entering the country, that's for sure.
Okay, so the 6 operators that have been selling this stuff, they've been issued with a formal warning, have they?
Yes, that's correct.
And what happens if they don't stop? Charges follow?
We may well gather further evidence on their activities, and if appropriate, we can go ahead with a prosecution. We have quite strong powers to obtain evidence, for instance, from computers and cell phones and all sorts of things. So we can obtain information on what they're doing and present that as a case to a court.
Because I'm wondering just how efficiently the rules and regulations are working, because earlier in the week there was another product, wasn't there, Arthrim, which makes claims that it's great for joints, I think it was, and that's been withdrawn from the market in exchange for MedSafe dropping legal action against the company. So are the regulations working here?
Yeah, it sometimes takes a long time to move something through the courts, and that was the case with Arthrim. Arthrim was a similar product which they made fairly strong therapeutic claims for, and also that particular product proved to be a problem with respect to liver toxicity. So instead of continuing to go through the court process, we decided to bring it to an end and then stop supply. But supply of that product probably diminished to almost negligible amounts last year or even maybe the year before.
But basically you were forced to do a deal with them, right? Because the company was warned, first in 2016, and this was still going on now. So was there no way to just order them to stop selling it, and then you were clogged up in the court, forced to barter with them in order to get what you thought was a dangerous product off the shelf?
What we have in the background is an upgrade to the Medicines Act, which will provide much better mechanisms to take action other than prosecuting through the courts. So we're looking forward to that eventuating and going through Parliament, and that will provide us with much more modern machinery, if you like, to be able to quickly take action and more effective action without having to wait for the court system to progress.
So how common is it to have these, they're therapeutic, what should we call them? They're not medicines, that's the whole point. They're masquerading as medicines by making false claims about what they can do. I mean, how common is the snake oil out there?
It's more common than we would like. Most organisations, once warned, stopped doing what they were doing, and that was the original approach back in 2016 with the Primacea company. Most organisations will understand it. Quite a lot in that particular area don't realise that they're breaking the law. Some do, and they will stop their advertising and supply. So there are only very few that really go through to the process where we find that we have to prosecute them. So we're sort of working on these sort of products all the time and issuing warning letters really quite regularly to companies.
So in summary, these two products that we've been talking about today, if you've got them on the shelf at home, what, bin them?
Yes, or return them to the relevant companies for credit, but certainly we advise don't take them, and if people have felt unwell whilst taking them, they should see their doctor.
And that was MedSafe Compliance Manager Derek Fitzgerald. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National is the Jobs in Nature program growing fast enough. And speaking of jobs, the Māori Pākehā pay gap in health, we'll tell you how big it is. The punters voting to keep politicians socially distanced for good, and the thieving little monkey that incriminated itself with a cheeky little selfie. Toki mai a koutou whakahoki kōrero. Send me your feedback, especially if you are missing money when you're booked with STA Travel. We would love to hear from you. Don't forget you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And Anna's here now with the headlines.
Thanks, Lisa. The mother of two pupils at an Auckland school says the half hour a child with coronavirus was at the school on Monday was during the morning rush hour. She's worried it took until Wednesday for families to find out, despite the child being confirmed as positive on Monday afternoon. Chapel Downs School is closed for cleaning until at least next Monday. The Finance Minister says today's GDP figures reflect the decision to act quickly to protect people's lives. The economy has shrunk by the largest amount on record and is in its first recession in a decade. National Party leader Judith Collins says the figures prove Labour's mismanagement, but Grant Robertson says COVID-19 is a 1 in 100-year global shock and no party would have avoided economic recession. The head of managed isolation says security has been bolstered after a man absconded from Rotorua's Sedima Hotel last night. The man was found nearby by Defence staff about half an hour after being reported missing. Air Commodore Darren Webb says they will look at whether extra security is needed. Weta Digital says it will not comment until a QC completes an independent review into complaints about harassment and bullying. Up to 40 former and current staff have reportedly spoken out about a toxic culture at the Wellington Visual Effects Company. New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says if elected, his party will lower tobacco excise so cigarettes cost no more than $20. He says the party supports making alternatives to smoking affordable and widely available. But Jacinda Ardern says the Labour Party won't make any cuts to tobacco taxes. And fire crews are battling a large out-of-control fire near the Canterbury resort town of Hanmer Springs. Fire and Emergency says high winds are fanning the fire. There are no evacuations, but one residential property is at risk. And those are the headlines.
Thanks, Anna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint, and you've tuned in time for the business news with Nicholas Poynton, who's joined me in the studio. RBNZ, Reserve Bank, it says the country's banks are in good health, but there are some issues on the horizon?
Yeah, so the RBNZ has done a stress test of the financial strength of the country's main banks to see how they're faring against COVID-19. They released those findings today, and the main thing we learnt was that, and this would reassure many people, that the banks, they're in a pretty good position. The banks have significant capital on file to weather the pressure brought on by the pandemic, but there is a lot more to this. The RBNZ came up with a number of scenarios to really test the strength of the banks, and one was a 1 in 50/75 year event where house prices fell by 37% and unemployment hit 14%. And it turns out thankfully, that most of the banks would be able to handle a situation like this.
But they went full catastrophe with the scenario, clearly.
Yeah. And where it gets worrying is when the banks found themselves in a 1 in 100 year event. Now, this is a scenario where house prices would fall by 15% and unemployment would eclipse 18%. And they say the banks would not have the minimum capital requirements to handle such a significant event. It says it really highlights the fact that banks are not invincible. And I think what you can see here is that maybe the Reserve Bank is maybe giving themselves a bit of a pat on the back, because what they're saying is that this reaffirms the decision they made last year for the banks to keep more money on reserve should there be a significant downturn. Taking stock of this at the moment, if we look at what's going on in the economy or house prices, they've proven to be immune to the pandemic. And unemployment, well, the latest forecast we've got, they expect it to peak at about just under 8%. So, look, given with the situation we're dealing right now, banks are in a pretty good position, but that $1 million question with the banks is whether or not they will continue to lend at pre-COVID levels over the medium term.
Okay. Commerce Commission. Now, this is interesting. They have sent, is it a strong message to the telcos about their mobile plans? What are they saying? Yeah,
this is really interesting. So they've published this open letter, and it's essentially calling out the telcos. It's a message for the likes of Spark, Vodafone, and 2 Degrees. And what they're saying is that these big telcos, they need to step in and stop their customers spending so much on plans that they don't actually need. And it reached this conclusion after they reviewed the mobile phone bills for 80,000 customers. And what they found was that a quarter of them were on plans that were paying for plans that they weren't actually using, they weren't actually maximising.
So you mean, hang on, you're paying for a souped up plan which has XYZ number of phone calls and maybe limitless data when actually you're only using a fraction of it.
Well, yeah, you could probably get away with being on a $19 a month prepaid plan.
So
right?
do they want the telcos to proactively tell the customers you are ordering up way more than you need?
Yeah, and this is a really interesting question, right? With a situation like this, where does responsibility fall? Because is it up to the consumer to be enlightened, to do their market research, find out what's best for them, or does the responsibility fall on the telcos who have all that data about how much you are using your phone plan? Well, it's kind of clear that the Commerce Commission is maybe suggesting that it's up to the telcos, and they use the example of electricity companies. They say that they've already taken a number of steps to ensure that consumers are well aware of what else is there on the market.
Yeah.
There are those online tools that allow people to compare and review what plan they're on, so they can really shop around and find the best deal. And that's what the Commerce Commission is maybe suggesting here. Unfortunately, because I've had such a crazy day with GDP numbers, I haven't actually had the pleasure to go to the telcos
and see what they think of it.
But I think one thing that they would say in their defence is that they're acutely aware that in this current climate, their worst nightmare is people not being able to pay for their phone plans. So they're actually being very diligent and actively going out at the moment and making sure that customers who may be already late on their mobile plans are actually on the right plans, because the last thing they want is for people not to be able to pay for their phone bills.
But that's different again from people who are paying for an upsized service that they're not using. It's an interesting debate because the waiter doesn't come to you and says, hey, you're being a bit piggy and ordering too much food, do they?
Well, yeah, so look, if they want to stay in business. I find this stuff really, really fascinating, because it's clear that the Commerce Commission has shown the carrot to the sector. It's all going to be interesting to see whether or not they'll show the stick.
Yeah.
And I have a hunch that the industry and the regulators are going to come to a blow over this, because over a month ago I came on the show and we were talking about the big chief executives from the telcos saying that a lot of people were paying too little for the plans that they were on. Yesterday when I came and talked to you about Spark's strategy for the next few years, they spoke about how they really want to sort of upscale people, get them off sort of those prepaid plans and more into those monthly plans. So, look, it's going to be a lot
coming in this space.
Yeah, there's a lot to come, and I think there'll be a lot more developments here.
Shall we have a quick whip around the numbers?
Yeah, sure. The NZX Top 50, it's down by nearly a third to 11,777. Sort of hovered around this mark for the week. Our dollar is at 66.8 US cents, 92 Australian, 51.7 British pence, and gold is down nearly 1%. to $1,940 an ounce.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business News. Māori working at district health boards are 56 times less likely to earn more than $100,000 than Pākehā, while Pacific staff are 71 times less likely. Those are just a couple of the shocking ethnic pay gaps throughout the public sector, exposed in new research published in the International Journal of Critical Indigenous Studies. Ruth Hill reports.
Equal employment opportunity legislation has been embedded in New Zealand law for more than 30 years. But retired public servant Georgina Kerr says institutional racism is alive and well. She's saddened but not surprised by the massive pay inequities found by the Auckland University of Technology researchers.
Over the years, I've lost a lot of good friends who've moved on to other jobs because they've been cast aside, not been given the opportunity. I did eventually become a senior manager in my workplace. I know I contributed really well. I could have done it 10 years earlier, but I just got to that, I got to that position much later than people I would have started with.
Georgina Kerr says too many government departments are guilty of brownwashing. They want Māori employees leading pōwhiri and saying karakia at board meetings, but they don't actually make any effort to create an inclusive workplace.
Basically, for many years, public sector agencies have tended to treat the recruitment of Māori and Pacifica, I'm just talking about those two groups at the moment, as a compliance or risk mitigation rather than a positive opportunity. And I know this because as an experienced senior, retired Māori public servant now, I have felt and lived it, over the years. So we are seen as a sort of commodity.
Mrs Kerr is part of the PSA's Mana Wahine Waitangi Tribunal claim against the Crown for discrimination against Māori women in the workplace. This follows a successful legal case taken by the PSA against the State Services Commission in 2016 to eliminate gender and ethnic pay disparities within the public service. The union's National Secretary, Kerry Davies, says it's not enough to just have equal pay legislation.
Once we get equal pay, we also have to deal with the systemic issues about how workplaces operate in terms of their recruitment processes, how they operate career progression across a sector, what is their remuneration, like do they use discretionary pay systems which tend to reinforce discrimination.
In a written statement, Public Service Commissioner Peter Hughes says the public service has made good progress on closing the gender pay gap in recent years and getting more women into senior roles, and is now focused on closing the ethnic pay gap. The head of AUT's Public Health Department, Dr Heather Kame, who led the new research, says diversity programs aren't effective and a national plan is needed to purge institutional racism.
There's been a lot of ad hoc efforts, and I would like to see the implementation of the recommendation of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination from 2017 that asked our government to develop a national action plan to eliminate racism. And a significant part of that needs to be how we're going to address institutional racism within the public sector.
Dr Kame says the data, taken over 15 years, shows at some points some district health boards and other government departments had no Māori or Pacifica people in senior leadership.
That's often a key treaty responsiveness strategy articulated by these DHBs, but there's a gap in the rhetoric and the practice over decades.
Workforce Equities Manager for Northland DHB, Dr Joy Panoho, says equal employment opportunity can't be viewed as a band-aid solution.
When a hiring manager says, I'm only going to employ someone if they're good for the job, the assumption is that everybody has the same opportunity to apply for the job. That assumes that we live in a meritocracy, but we don't. If we all had the same opportunity, we would not see the occupational segregation that we see.
A spokesperson for district health boards says all DHB chief executives have signed up to implementing targets on Māori workforce, and the latest reports on those targets will be available in a few weeks. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
The UK is experiencing a surge in COVID-19 cases with nearly 4,000 new cases recorded overnight, 50% higher than a week ago. Pubs and restaurants across the country are set to face earlier closing times. London's public health chief has also warned of a local curfew in the city. Thousands of people are facing delays in getting their coronavirus test results as the health system fails to keep up with demand. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the extra demand is mainly due to schools reopening. But as critics say, it's also because the government has failed to deliver its promises. The BBC's Hugh Pym reports.
Long waits and frustration for people in Southend queuing at a walk-in virus testing centre today. Further evidence of the immense strain on the whole system.
I dropped my daughter off with my granddaughter. She was about 350 people behind all these to be told that they cannot get tested because they don't have enough. They only had enough tests to do for about 150 people.
Beth, who lives in Surrey, has been trying repeatedly since yesterday to book a test, but can't. She and two of her children have symptoms.
It's extremely stressful. It's added a lot of stress to what is already, an upsetting time for us. Well, we're managing everybody being poorly, trying to get through and constantly trying to check my phone just to try and hope that we'll find a test somewhere. And it's really frustrating, to be honest.
Experiences like that fuelled exchanges at Prime Minister's questions.
They've had 6 months, Mr Speaker, to get this right, and yet the Prime Minister still can't deliver on his promises. The Health Secretary said yesterday it would take weeks to sort the situation out. Well, Mr Speaker, we don't have weeks.
What is happening, Mr Speaker, is that the British people, quite understandably, are responding to that system with a huge surge in demand.
Later, the Prime Minister at a Commons committee admitted there were problems.
We don't have enough testing capacity now because in an ideal world I would like to test absolutely everybody that wants a test immediately.
The government says the UK is testing more than other leading European countries, and that is the case with the number expressed relative to the population. There are, though, some smaller European nations doing more. But laboratories analysing the tests here are struggling to keep up with the workload. The government says new labs are coming on stream, but not for a few weeks.
And things like going back to schools.
One health expert told me all this should have been anticipated a few months ago.
The surge in demand for testing in this as we enter autumn was extremely predictable, particularly because we expected COVID cases to increase again as autumn comes, which we're seeing they are, but also we were expecting COVID-like symptoms from conditions such as the common cold and flu to increase too, and both of those combined for an increased demand in testing.
Back in July, people were being actively encouraged to get tests.
If you're just worried, if you've got a temperature, you've got a cough, or you're just not quite sure that you feel right, the sensible thing to do in this COVID world is to go and get a test.
Now it's very different. Capacity is much tighter, and the message is that only those with symptoms like high temperature should book a test. Confusion over what to do may well have added to the recent surge.
Hugh Pym reporting there. France is also experiencing a spike in coronavirus infections as the country suffers a major setback in its management of the virus. While doctors are better equipped to deal with COVID-19 now, there are concerns this new wave could overwhelm hospitals. CNN's Melissa Bell reports.
It's the young driving the newest wave of COVID-19, French officials say. Now they're passing it on to their older relatives. For the doctors and nurses on the front line, it's about dealing with a virus that is here to stay. This hospital is preparing for the arrival of more COVID-19 patients, but unlike last spring, will continue to treat other emergencies as well.
The university hospital will be dealing with those two populations, and that is what makes the situation harder. It's also going to be harder than last time because this wave, I think, will grow progressively and then last over time.
But as he shows us around the ICU, Dr. Johannes Boyot says that at least now lots more is known. The use of steroids and specially adapted ventilators that can now avoid contamination means that this time, intubations are down 50% since the spring, he says.
Because intubation is dangerous and intubation is painful and it's a last resort.
Yeah, intubation increases the risk of ICU stay duration. Sometimes we don't have the choice and we have to intubate the patient and ventilate the patient because he's not able to use the oxygen that we bring to him.
So doctors are better at dealing with COVID-19, but that doesn't mean they're not worried.
Melissa Bell reporting. It is 7 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A South Island tourism operator says he could have prevented redundancies if it wasn't for delays to a nature-based job creation scheme. More than $1 billion was earmarked for the Jobs for Nature program in May as part of the government's cross-agency COVID-19 recovery package to run over 4 years. Today, Conservation Minister Eugenie Sage announced an extra $19.7 million for kiwi conservation, aimed to reverse the decline of the species. While the funding has been welcomed, some applicants have been waiting months in limbo, unsure if they'll get a green light. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton has more.
Part of the recovery package included $200 million specifically to help struggling businesses to maintain their workforce through nature-based work, giving them a breather to recover. For Canterbury-based Hiking New Zealand co-director Daniel Murphy, the Jobs for Nature program promised a lifeline after visitors dried up and the prospect of hibernation became a looming reality.
We've had to hibernate our business, make our staff redundant, and this could help us get through these next year, 2 years, or however long it takes by keeping our business just ticking over and keeping our core staff together.
His local dock manager recommended he put a business proposal together, which he sent in May. His proposal was simple. His crew of 20 with their extensive backcountry experience and practical outdoors abilities could start immediately on any conservation work needed in Canterbury, and they could source more unemployed tourism workers if needed. Mr Murphy followed up with letters to Conservation Minister Eugenie Sage. While she has been supportive, he says he's been told to wait for alliances to be built between DOC, iwi, councils and businesses.
Our biggest fear that this is just slowing things down when we've got people that are out of work, desperately need to be employed. It's just languishing, and I think there needs to be some accountability. This promise has been made by the government, $1.3 billion. It's a lot of money. It should have created a lot more jobs than it has by now, we feel.
He's also worried business owners may find work for their staff in Jobs for Nature projects, but not themselves. But Mr Murphy says allowing capable businesses to manage staff and the project would solve that issue. Former Hiking New Zealand worker Megan McKenna says the program gave her hope when redundancies were first mooted.
It was quite a stressful time knowing that we all loved working where we did and we didn't want that to have to happen. But that silver lining of hearing about Jobs for Nature, that was quite exciting. We thought, well, that's definitely aligns with what we do as well on our tours. So it really did kind of align with what the business was all about already. So that was really exciting to hear that.
But with no word about the program and support from the wage subsidy all dried up, she was made redundant last month. Now she spends most nights working on her CV, trying to find work.
You can spend a few hours applying and doing an application process, and then, you might not even be seen because of the amount of people applying. This Jobs for Nature was quite exciting just because it meant that we could be outdoors and stay as a team and do something meaningful. But yeah, I guess we're still just in hope of that happening at some point.
Further south in Otago, Glenn Riley from Habitat Restoration's Aotearoa is hopeful to have boots on the ground to plant natives in the next 2 weeks. He was first approached about Jobs for Nature back in May, but says it's worth the wait to guaranteed jobs.
If everything was that easy, there'd be a lot of room for unaccountable sort of action. So the fact that it's taken long, I don't see as an issue really. Well, not as an issue, but it's to be expected for such large-scale funding and work.
Glenn Riley was inundated with applications when he advertised 4 new roles over 10 weeks for the Jobs for Nature funded project. And he's hopeful he may be able to offer more jobs in the future.
We've got a massive opportunity now to fix a couple of things at once, and I think it's the best opportunity we've ever had to really value our environmental work and create an entire industry out of it.
Conservation Minister Eugenie Sage acknowledges the delays, saying it's taking time to set up the regional alliances, with 2 nearly ready and the rest between 20 to 60% of the way, depending on the region.
As we've seen with the tailing off the wage subsidy, that is a real issue for businesses that have benefited from the subsidy. So I'm being assured by the department that everyone is working as fast as possible, and I know the department has in touch with a lot of the regional contacts to make sure those alliances are being established as quickly as possible.
With regional alliances in place, she says the application turnaround will be a matter of weeks, not months. Daniel Murphy says it's not the program, but the process he's worried about.
It's an awesome opportunity. It's a great initiative, but if it flounders, it's going to be terrible, because not only are we creating jobs, but the outcome of getting all these people out there doing this work, it's just going to be so beneficial for the environment and New Zealanders and our visitors when they can come back here.
He remains hopeful his Jobs for Nature dreams can still become a reality. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, TNA.
And let's get to your feedback. This one on STA Travel, the $10 million outstanding for creditors. All people who have booked travel with STA only have themselves to blame, says Helen. STA was not a TAANZ bonded travel agent, buyer beware. Travel always carries substantial risks. Airlines collapse, weather events, government coups. Is that a bit harsh? I'm not sure. Paddy says on the PPE, it's not 100% effective.
Rnz News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Auckland health authorities want every student and teacher at Chapel Downs Primary School to be tested for coronavirus after a student caught it. The child was at school for half an hour on Monday morning before class started, but staff and parents were only told on Wednesday. Jordan Bond reports.
The child had a COVID test on Sunday, which was returned as positive on Monday afternoon. One parent has expressed frustration that it took 2 more days to be told a positive case was at school when her children were. The Public Health Service says notification to the school happened as soon as things were confirmed. It's now urging everyone who was at school between 8:30 and 9 on Monday morning to be tested as a precaution. They're deemed casual contacts and shouldn't interact with people outside their family until a negative result is returned. Call Jordan Bond, aho.
The Finance Minister says today's GDP figures reflect the decision to act quickly to protect New Zealanders' lives. The economy has shrunk by the largest amount on record and is into its first recession in a decade. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
Official numbers show the gross domestic product, the total value of goods and services produced in the country, was down by 12.2% in the last quarter. Grant Robertson says this is better than the 16% Treasury was predicting, and while it's worse than Australia's 7% contraction, he believes this country is still in a better position. He says New Zealand is more reliant on international tourism, so has felt the impact of closed borders more acutely. But he says unemployment will peak significantly lower than Australia's, and the country will rebound faster. This is Yvette McCullough.
The government's medicine regulator is advising anyone who has bought a coffee powder promoted as a weight loss product to bin it. Elevacity Elevate Smart Coffee Powder contains an amphetamine-like substance which can cause increased heart rate, blood pressure and has psychological effects. MedSafe's compliance manager Derek Fitzgerald told Checkpoint it can be dangerous.
People selling these products online, they don't care about your health or things like that. They might pretend to care about your health or your well-being. They're just in it for making money.
Derek Fitzgerald says 6 vendors selling the powder have been warned to stop and they have complied. New Zealand First says if elected it will lower tobacco excise so the average pack of cigarettes costs no more than $20. Its leader Winston Peters says the party supports the strategy of the anti-smoking group ASH of making alternatives to smoking affordable and widely available. However, the Labour Party won't be backing the New Zealand First proposal. Its leader Jacinda Ardern says tobacco taxes have been proven around the world to reduce smoking. Residents of a small North Canterbury town have turned out in droves to oppose a new liquor store opening. Thirsty Liquor wants to open a store in Amberley, about 40 minutes north of Christchurch. The Hurunui District Licensing Committee received nearly 100 submissions, and a 3-day hearing attracted so many people there wasn't enough space at the council's office. Amberley School Principal Simon Green says alcohol-related problems have got significantly worse in the town over the last 4 years.
Children that come home and say that their parents had been drinking the night before and couldn't get them to school on time, or couldn't make their lunch, or were still asleep when they left home, those sorts of things. So we document all that. We make notifications to Oranga Tamariki when it is of sufficient concern.
Simon Green from Amberley Primary School in North Canterbury. Fire crews are battling a large out-of-control fire near the Canterbury resort town of Hanmer Springs. 12 crews are fighting the fire near Mouse Point on State Highway 7. A fire and emergency spokesperson, Andrew Norris, says there are no evacuations, but one residential property is at risk.
They've protected some properties that were endangered, but at this stage our main concern is for the power supply that goes through that area, not threatening any other buildings. The very strong winds are causing major problems, and the crews are working to do what they can to try and contain the fire.
And part of State Highway 7 is closed. The PSA says new research showing huge salary gaps for Māori and Pacific workers in the public service shows New Zealand needs pay transparency legislation. The Auckland University of Technology study shows Māori and Pacific peoples are much less likely to earn over $100,000. The union's National Secretary, Kerry Davies, says to wipe out institutional racism, clear data is needed.
Unfortunately, when pay is invisible and it's not open to public scrutiny, then discrimination thrives. And so we need to shine a spotlight on pay rates and the criteria for getting certain pay rates so that we can expose any discrimination.
Kerry Davies from the PSA. It's 6:05. In sport, there will be no Test rugby for the world champion Black Ferns this year. The national women's rugby team was due to play 8 tests, but New Zealand Rugby says there will now be a 3-match schedule in November. That starts with a possibles versus probables match, from which a Black Ferns squad will be picked, and then play 2 games against a Barbarian side. The Black Ferns fullback Salika Winiata says it's disappointing to have no Test matches, but they understand the problems.
With what COVID's done, we all understand that, New Zealand Rugby and the government have tried their best. They've been working really hard behind the scenes to try and get us some, international test matches. But unfortunately, with the restrictions around the borders, it's just a no-go.
New Zealand Rugby hopes it can organise tests for the Black Ferns in April or May. Auckland golfer Ryan Fox says it's not a big issue going into this week's US Open in New York, despite not having played the course before. The Winged Foot course has been described as one of the toughest on the circuit. Ryan Fox expects it to be brutal.
The whole process of learning a golf course doesn't really change. It's just, generally the major golf courses are that little bit tougher, a little bit trickier. You really got to understand where, not to miss it, or where the best place is to miss your shots, because you're always going to miss some throughout the week.
And fellow New Zealander Danny Lee is also in the tournament. And that's the news.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Families were restricted or stopped from visiting altogether, and that has an immediate impact on isolating our mothers, our grandmothers, our grandfathers.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
We had our second death today from the Auckland cluster, 2 people in one family, and then to see that and go and say, oh, COVID-19 doesn't exist, that's pretty offensive, and it's also dangerous.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight. Tomorrow for Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Cloudy today with a period of rain around midday tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine with some rain tomorrow. Waikato to Wellington, including the central high country and also Wairarapa. Cloud increasing with patchy drizzle. Rain developing tomorrow morning and then clearing and becoming fine by early afternoon. Severe northwest gales in Wellington and Wairarapa today. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, rain spreading north with thunderstorms possible, and snow to about 500 metres in Fiordland, becoming fine tomorrow morning, but showers spreading north to Buller by the evening. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, rain spreading north and snow lowering to 300 metres, easing to showers in the south tonight, then becoming fine elsewhere tomorrow afternoon. Severe westerly gales in exposed places. And for the Chatham Islands, mainly fine, with a period of rain tomorrow. RNZ National, it is 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Thanks, Anna. Kia ora anō. Comments from the Director General of Health around whether Auckland University lectures can go ahead next week have caused confusion for thousands of tertiary students and the universities themselves. Auckland University has had to pull the pin on plans to resume lectures next week after Dr. Ashley Bloomfield yesterday said lectures with 300 people could not restart because gathering sizes are still limited to 10 people in Tamaki Makaurau. That's in direct contradiction to Ministry of Education guidelines, which state there are no size restrictions for lectures or classes. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Auckland University students have been raising concerns for weeks about their return to campus. This third-year medical student says with only a few days without any community transmission cases recorded, there was widespread concern about packed lecture theatres next week.
What we need to consider is that, yes, we have 280 people in the same place, but in addition to that, we have the connections to all of their families. And if, say, my brother, I have a sibling, he also goes to university, that also further extends our bubble to more than just that group of people. If you compare that to high school or primary school or secondary school, they tend to stay more local and their class sizes are a lot smaller. And so I can understand how the Ministry of Education would allow schools to return to normal, but university is a different situation.
Auckland University had asked all students to be back in classes from Monday. It planned to hold lectures with a limit of 300 people. That was until Director General of Health Dr. Ashley Bloomfield made these comments yesterday.
I am assuming that the university knows exactly what the expectations are around physical distancing and that they will be implementing that, and in particular that it should be groups of no more than 10 people together, and so I'll be interested to look and we'll follow up if there's any sense that there will be larger groups in any of the lecture theatres.
In an email to staff and students, Auckland University said Dr. Bloomfield's comments had caused confusion and added to the level of anxiety. That's because the university had been following guidelines set out by the Ministry of Education and its plans to return to campus. They state the limits of gathering sizes do not apply to education-related activities and lectures and classes of more than 100 students are allowed. It says the Ministry of Education confirmed that guidance was unchanged, despite this comment from Dr. Bloomfield.
Under Alert Level 2.5, there can't be 300, and there can't actually be groups more than 10.
That confusion has prompted the university to continue in online learning mode for another 2 weeks, until Friday the 2nd of October, regardless of alert levels. There's still no consistency across the city as to how other institutions are operating. Massey University is providing most lectures online for the rest of the semester and won't be having in-person lectures of more than 100 students. Auckland University of Technology will be having lectures from Monday. Class sizes will vary, but it says appropriate social distancing is being followed. Unitec says both its campuses are fully open and operational. In a statement, the Ministry of Education said it was confident tertiary providers had strong public health controls in place, with most not offering large face-to-face classes under Alert Level 2. The Ministries of Education and Health said they acknowledged there hadn't been specific guidelines on what Level 2.5 means for tertiary education in Auckland ahead of the new semester starting, and that work was being prioritised. For Checkpoint, Corneta Blake-Person, Aho.
Restrictions on gatherings under Alert Level 2 are continuing to hamper political campaigning. A month out from the election, most of the political parties are giving Auckland a wide berth, with the super city still at Alert Level 2.5. Winston Peters says it's the worst campaign he's ever been involved in. Judith Collins is calling it a challenge. And David Seymour says it's definitely been different this time around. Katie Doyle reports on the Hapai tō Rangapu.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Nice to meet you. Hello. How are
I'm not meant to hug people at the moment, but I think I'll give you an elbow bump.
Yeah, it's okay.
Campaign season is often a time of hugs, hongi and handshakes, where voters cram into packed halls while listening to the big election promises. But COVID-19 has put the brakes on hard, with gatherings limited and social distancing a must. Tighter restrictions in Auckland mean gatherings are limited to 10, so most of the political parties are staying away for now. Unique conditions the New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters isn't enjoying.
Well, it's the worst campaign that I've ever been involved in, because not only is it in the cold parts and months of the year, but it's in circumstances where people cannot be meeting, cannot assemble in halls, where you can't have the traditional political dialogue. But we'll get by and we'll keep on doing what we can do in the circumstances.
The ACT leader, David Seymour, says it's been different, but no less enjoyable. He's adapted to make sure he can meet and greet as many as he can from a safe distance.
We actually had a QR code for the street corner meetings, and so people bringing their phones and signing in. We gave people hand sanitizer. Most people in Epsom had brought their moisturiser as well, so it was all good.
Voters have noticed it's an unusual campaign as well.
I don't think anyone's really trying for a vote, so doesn't really seem like there's that much campaigning or good policies yet.
Pretty much the same. It's probably held a wee bit in check by the coronavirus.
It's been okay. I think most of the attention's been taken away by COVID. But yeah, I still see it a lot, not as exciting or as dramatic as previous years, I guess.
I haven't had much time to think about it, to be honest. It's kind of just running its course. We've been given an extra month to think about it, and I hope people do. But to me, it's pretty obvious what's going to happen.
COVID campaigning has been a challenge for National Leader Judith Collins, who says it's been hard not holding public meetings. She says National is just going to have to get creative with how it reaches voters.
We're just getting on to doing it different ways. We're using a lot more social media. We're using a lot more opportunities to talk through, obviously, media, but it just means we have to change.
Labour leader Jacinda Ardern says her party hasn't been able to hold its normal rallies, but she doesn't think it's affecting Labour's ability to reach voters.
Rallies often engage those who have already made up their mind, for instance, and so for us, it's those chances to engage with people as part of their everyday life, on the job, out on the street. That's where you meet people who are less committed to their vote.
Not all voters are missing the regular campaign schedule, though. Some say they'd prefer to stay socially distanced from politicians forever.
I haven't taken much notice. No. Hey, whoever gets in. Gets in. Yep. That's as far as I'm concerned. As long as they leave me alone.
Cabinet will review New Zealand's alert levels on Monday, but has agreed in principle to move everywhere but Auckland back to level 1, as long as the outbreak is contained and there's no significant bump in cases. It's also at that point when officials will look at tweaking the gathering size limits in Auckland. For Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
It is 16 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. President Trump has again contradicted his own health officials, this time on the importance of mask wearing and the timing for a coronavirus vaccine. The president has doubled down on his prediction a vaccine will be available to Americans within months. But the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention says it's more likely to be mid to late 2021 at the earliest. CNN's Erica Hill reports.
A vaccine is in the works, but
when is it going to be generally available to the American public so we can begin to take advantage of vaccine to get back to our regular life? I think we're probably looking at late second quarter, third quarter, 2021.
The back half of next year. While we wait, the president still insisting the virus will soon go away.
It is going to disappear. It's going to disappear.
It's not disappearing. On the same day Mr. Trump made that claim, the U.S. recorded more than 39,000 new cases and almost 1,300 deaths, the most in nearly a month.
We are on the verge of exceeding 200,000 deaths. I'm very concerned that the next few months may be amongst the worst months that we have experienced.
Our daily trends map shifting in the wrong direction. 23 states now red, posting a rise in new cases over the past week. 34 reporting an increase in deaths during that same period.
And at what point do the American people say enough?
New analysis shows racism and discrimination have contributed to higher hospitalization and death rates for people of color. Separately, the CDC noting children and teens from minority groups are also disproportionately impacted by the virus, though overall, less than 0.1% of the nation's coronavirus deaths have been in those under 21. Testing also moving in the wrong direction, down, despite continued promises from the task force.
I said we will have the availability of 90 million tests in September. I never stated that we would do 90 million tests in September. We're certainly hoping that the testing goes up.
Wisconsin testing wastewater around the state to find the virus before it hits.
Erica Hill reporting. Sydney's trying to deal with an exodus of people from tower blocks in the centre of the city as people continue working from home. Cafes and restaurants are worried the foot traffic may never return to pre-COVID levels. However, the troubles in the CBD are providing a bump for suburban cafes and restaurants. The ABC's Isabel Rowe reports.
Just across from the Strathfield train station in Sydney's inner west, the Chef's Palate restaurant is busy churning out breakfast and coffee for dozens of customers. Their seating capacity is reduced, but supervisor Young Han Kim says business isn't bad for a pandemic.
It seems like it's getting better, but still not back to fully before.
With fewer people taking the train to Sydney's CBD for work, Young Han Kim says the Chef's Palate is getting by on local support.
All the people who's coming here is regular, so we don't have any new people coming in, but mainly local people, and because they're not going to work, we get people coming in more than usual, I say, yeah.
Strathfield has a large Korean population. Up the road from the Chef's Palate, baker John Jung thinks his community's fear of the virus is still affecting trade.
Very hard, very difficult time. Slowly we get better. People start come back. When Victoria, the virus start again, we become very hard again. At the moment, still not good. Local people still scared.
In Potts Point, a few kilometres north of the CBD, Shasha Barclay is opening her fashion boutique on the main street.
Hello, Coco. So, it's actually a really large shop. All the locals were just so lovely. Then we had a bit of a moment there, a few weeks ago. Then we became a bit of a hotspot, and I sold masks. That rescued me. It was a girl up here who was out of work, a designer, and everyone, one day it started, do you sell masks, Shasha? And I was thinking, why would I sell masks? Then I thought, why not? And so that actually rescued me for a couple of weeks. I've seen a few recessions and things in my life and had big businesses before this, so you've just sort of got to go with it.
Potts Point is the second most densely populated suburb in Australia, and now each morning cafes and bakeries are swarmed with locals, now working from home.
Hello. Hi, how are you?
Stephanie Onisfaru had just opened up her first business, a French patisserie, when cafes were ordered to shut.
So we were open for about 2 weeks before we were closed down, but we had incredible support from the community, and even when we were takeaway only, we have our kitchen upstairs, so we were baking pastries fresh every day. So people were coming in the morning, in the afternoon, or at lunchtime, and people were really just loving having, I think, a bit of being able to communicate with people even from the outside, and even if they're speaking through an acrylic panel to keep us both safe, they were able to sort of form that connection every day. And I think from then, when we were able to open again, people sort of loved coming back to the business. That almost helped them get through the pandemic in a way.
I'm guessing business didn't go exactly how you planned, but how did it go financially starting like this?
So it was definitely difficult, but I think I have to say that we're really lucky and that we were really supported. As we opened right on COVID, we were able to grab a lot of employees that had lost jobs as well, and that was something to me that I felt really grateful to be able to do. So I think supporting the community, whether it was a little bit of money, I was just really happy to have that bond with everybody and support in any way we can.
The ABC's Isabel Rowe with that report. It's probably not your first thought when pulling on a nylon or polyester jumper, but scientists say microfibres from synthetic clothes cause huge amounts of plastic pollution, both in water and on land. The researchers estimate 5.6 million tonnes of waste fibres have been shed during clothes washes over the past 7 decades, the equivalent to 13 billion fleece jackets. Now they've come up with a solution to the environmental problem by using an unexpected food source. The BBC's Richard Westcott has the story.
Everyone in this lab is full of plastic. Well, their lab coats are anyway. A lot of our clothes are full of tiny little balls that have got fragrance inside. It's what makes them smell so nice. Now, normally they're made of plastic, which washes into the environment and stays there for decades. What if you could make them out of something that's better for the planet? Like peas. This is the first company in the world to engineer plant protein into a material that does the same job as single-use plastic. Things like the microcapsules that you'd often get inside fabric conditioners or cosmetics.
At the moment, the microcapsules contain plastic, which would not degrade and last for ages in the ocean. Our capsules were made of protein and would be eaten by fish eventually.
It's taken 15 years to perfect the process. Here they're using peas, but you can use other common plants, including potatoes. Eventually, it comes out as a liquid that can be made into plastic-like sheets. Dishwasher tablets, sandwich packets, sweet wrappers, all made of something that biodegrades naturally in a matter of days. Is there a danger you're just replacing one problem with another? So farmers who should be growing food are actually going to grow peas to make plastic, and then we don't have enough food.
There are a lot of waste products already in the farming process that have got very low value or even are just ploughed straight back into the field that can be sold on and used to make our kind of materials. Single-use plastics and microplastics don't need to be made from fossil fuels. There's something very wrong about making materials from oil that last just for a minute or two.
It's thought the average family washes around 14 million tiny plastic balls down the drain each week. Several countries are in the process of banning them. Now there's a way of swapping that harmful plastic for something made from peas.
Richard Westcott reporting. 20 years ago, the government of Zimbabwe seized back farmland from largely white farm owners in a move that was meant to redress colonial-era land grabs. Now the country's new government has offered to return some of those seized farms to their previous owners, but some Zimbabweans aren't happy about that. The BBC's Shingai Nyoko reports.
A new uncertainty for Zimbabwe's black farmers. Those who were settled on land belonging to foreign citizens now face losing it as the government tries to close the chapter on the controversial past.
The British are threatening to withdraw their companies. We say the sooner you do it, the better.
Fighting talk by then-President Robert Mugabe. His policy to return land to blacks as a remedy for colonial-era land grabs became chaotic and is returned to haunt the government. There are more black farmers on the land now, but the question of ownership remains a divisive one more than 20 years on. And the government is still trying to strike a balance between local interests and international obligations. Farms protected under bilateral investment protection agreements were parcelled out in violation of local laws, and now these families could be moved.
We don't like it because this is Zimbabwe, this is our land.
They say they were assured that the takeover was legal. For 20 years they've sunk roots here, raised children, buried family on this land.
Government is the people. We are the government. So I don't think our government can say we can go back home. I don't think so. I don't believe that.
Yes. We are working for the government. Yes. So we are not worried and we don't fear anything new. Because we are the rightful owners of this land. Yes.
But there are greater forces at play. International court judgments demand that the land is restored or hundreds of millions of dollars is paid in damages.
I'm convinced that in the long run, the government of Zimbabwe will fulfill its international obligations. I do not believe anything will happen overnight. I think this is a process, not an event.
The Van Petzold family won an international judgment 5 years ago and remain cautiously optimistic.
We are now waiting to be contacted by government and to find a solution with government. An announcement as such is not yet action, and we've had many announcements before.
The government, however, says not all foreign-owned farms will be returned.
There is consideration whether in the public interest, defense, security of the country, there is merit in doing so. Where it is no longer possible, then compensation is offered.
That report from Shingai Noioko. A phone-stealing monkey's accidentally produced some selfie-incriminating evidence of its crime. See what we did there? According to the Malaysian phone owner, he discovered videos and pictures seemingly taken by the monkey after finding his missing phone in a jungle behind his house. Lydia Batham reports.
We open on a jungle scene, followed by a quick pan revealing yellow eyes and fur. The screen goes red, then next thing you know, we're inside a monkey's mouth. This is the work apparently captured by a phone-stealing monkey in Malaysia, and it seems it filmed the entire crime. Shaky footage, perhaps filmed in time-lapse mode, shows the camera travelling through a house before we see a cloudy sky, greenery and a furry monkey body. Once in the jungle, it seems our monkey friend sat down, perhaps hungry after the burglary. It takes to popping the phone in and out of its mouth. The cheeky chappie also captured some close-up images of its face. One's upside down, while others focus on the nose and mouth. It also snapped some artistic shots of the jungle landscape. The phone's owner says the monkey had been roaming around his house when it snatched the phone. He found the slightly battered and dirty phone near his garden the next day, and when he opened the camera reel, discovered who was responsible for it going missing. He shared the pictures and video on social media, tweeting he's washed his phone 7 times since. For Checkpoint, Lydia Batham.
Not sure even 7 times washing it would be enough. A lot of monkey goobs on that when you see where it's been. Thank you for joining us this evening. Don't forget you can check out our stories online, especially the video ones. Before we go on microplastics, this bit of feedback: buy a hoodie and feed a fish. Go the peas, they say.
Rnz News Headlines at 6:30. Auckland health authorities want every student and teacher at Chapel Downs Primary School to be tested for coronavirus after a student there tested positive. The Finance Minister is dismissing accusations of mismanagement over the country falling into recession. MedSafe is warning against a coffee powder containing a substance which increases the drinker's heart rate and blood pressure and has psychological effects. And 12 fire crews are battling a large out-of-control fire near Hanmer Springs in Canterbury, and part of State Highway 7 is closed. Our next news and weather at 7.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Balance on the healing power of fungi. That's right, medicinal rather than magic mushrooms. Taina Moitara talks about Māori art during Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. Colin Healy with the science fact behind the fiction.